When a plane crashes into the ocean, the passengers find themselves trapped in a desperate fight for survival, and among them is the governor's daughter. With danger lurking in the depths, will they make it out alive? Today, I'll be telling you about the 2024 action horror movie, No Way Up. Enjoy the story. In the opening scene of the movie, we see a woman falling into the ocean, floating lifelessly for a moment before her eyes snap open in terror. At that same instant, Brandon jolts awake in his room and starts gasping for air. He has just had another nightmare. They have haunted him ever since he failed to protect the governor's wife. Now, as the bodyguard to her daughter, Ava, he carries the weight of his past mistake everywhere he goes. Later that morning, Brandon and Ava arrive at the airport, where she meets with her friends, Jed and Kyle. Their excitement dims a little when they realize Brandon will be accompanying them. Ava explains that her father insisted on security, and this left them with no choice but to accept his presence. Soon, they board the plane, taking seats near the back while Brandon sits separately, giving them their space. As Ava looks around the aircraft, an uneasy feeling creeps in. There are very few passengers on this flight. Something feels off, but she brushes it aside as paranoia. Shortly after takeoff, a minor shake runs through the aircraft, an ordinary turbulence, or so it seems. Moments later, the plane trembles again, this time more violently. Outside, the engine begins to overheat, but the pilot reassures the passengers once more over the intercom, explaining they've hit a flock of birds. However, within seconds, a deafening explosion tears through the air as one of the engines bursts into flames. Chaos immediately erupts as the pilot's voice orders everyone to fasten their seatbelts. Suddenly, a section of the engine breaks off and crashes into the plane's fuselage, killing a passenger instantly. The rapid pressure drop triggers more chaos as those without seatbelts are flung from their seats. The aircraft shakes uncontrollably, and in a horrifying instant, a massive section of the wall is ripped away, exposing passengers to the open sky. One by one, they are sucked out, their screams swallowed by the wind. Even when Brandon tries to catch a man midair, his grip couldn't hold on as the man is torn from his grasp and disappears into the clouds. Meanwhile, a flight attendant attempts to save another passenger on the verge of being ejected, but both are blown away. Within seconds, the plane begins to descend uncontrollably. The aircraft smashes into the water and the impact splits the fuselage in half. Water immediately starts flooding the cabin. Brandon barely has time to react before a piece of metal hits him in the chest. The remaining seats collapse forward and crush the passengers as the plane sinks rapidly. The darkness in the deep ocean engulfs the wreckage as it finally settles at the bottom. Miraculously, due to the plane's position, an air pocket forms in the back part of the fuselage. Ava, Jed, Kyle, and a surviving flight attendant, Danilo, manage to find refuge there. Meanwhile, Kyle has suffered a severe fracture, leaving him in agonizing pain. Soon, a tense silence fills the cabin as the survivors listen to the sounds of the ocean pressing in around them. Then, they noticed movement in the water as Brandon surfaced, dragging with him Rosa, a young girl, and her unconscious grandmother, Marty, from the water. Danilo immediately begins chest compressions in a desperate attempt to revive the elderly woman. After several attempts, Marty regains consciousness. Moments later, Rosa turns to Brandon with worried eyes and asks about her grandfather. Brandon hesitates before telling her the devastating truth that he didn't make it. Ava then checks her phone, but at the depth they are, there's no signal. The reality settles on them as they realize that they are trapped, surrounded by water and darkness, with no way to call for help. As panic begins to set in, Brandon takes charge. He tells them that the air pocket is keeping them alive for now, but they must remain calm and wait for rescue. With time running out and oxygen levels depleting, their survival depends on their ability to stay composed. With his words, the survivors try to stay calm as Danilo reassures them, believing the pilots must have called for help before the crash. Rescue should be on the way soon. Meanwhile, Brandon suggests they secure backup oxygen in case their situation worsens. But when Danilo checks the emergency storage at the back of the plane, he discovers that the tanks are empty. As more tension builds, Marty recalls that one of the passengers had a medical oxygen tank. So, Brandon immediately volunteers to retrieve it. Before diving in, Marty makes a small request, to bring back her late husband's hat. Swimming through the aisles, Brandon carefully checks each lifeless body still strapped into their seats. He eventually finds the hat and grabs it, unaware of the shadow moving just outside the windows. Pushing forward, he locates the medical oxygen tank and retrieves it as well. Just as he's about to turn back, he takes a moment to scan the wreckage for anything else that could be useful. That decision proves to be a fatal mistake. Out of nowhere, a massive shark rushes in through the hole, clamping down on him with great force. Brandon desperately tries to break free, but the beast is relentless in its attack. Meanwhile, the group notices the disturbances in the water. Ripples form and spread, signaling that something is happening beneath them. Then, just as suddenly as they appeared, the ripples vanish. A moment later, Brandon emerges from the water as he gasps for breath. His body is covered in deep wounds with blood seeping into the water around him. With a sad expression, he tosses the oxygen tank and the hat to the others before locking eyes with Ava. He mutters an apology to her and then, in a horrifying instant, he is yanked back underwater as the shark drags him away. Paralyzed with fear, the remaining survivors retreat into the employee area as they decide to wait for rescue. They realize that following Brandon's advice seems like their only hope. Meanwhile, Marty takes it upon herself to tend to Kyle's broken arm. She reveals that she was a nurse during the war as she explains how she had met her husband under similar circumstances. With the limited supplies, she improvises a splint by using thick magazines and bandages. Kyle screams in pain as she sets the bone, but she manages to get the job done. In the meantime, a search helicopter circles the last known location of the airplane, looking for any signs of the crash. Since the governor's daughter was among the passengers, this was a top priority rescue for the men. Unfortunately, from their vantage point, they see nothing but endless water. Back at the wreckage, the survivors hear a shifting sound as the plane tilts slightly, making it clear that it could collapse at any moment. The group starts to contemplate their options, and just then, the water starts turning red. The sounds of splashing and tearing flesh make it clear the sharks have returned, feasting on the bodies of the dead passengers. The wreck shakes again as the sharks move and slam into debris of the fuselage. Now, very scared, Rosa begins to break down, but Ava reassures her, insisting that help will arrive soon. High above, the rescue team in the helicopter were not any closer to finding them, and their fuel gauge was getting low as well. In the meantime, the survivors notice that water level is rising, and they estimate they have around 3 to 4 hours before it reaches the back of the cabin. But the falling metal and slow trickle from the ceiling tell a different story, that they may not have that long. Then, suddenly, the plane falls further, and this drop sends debris falling as the plane slides deeper into the waters. Then, just as quickly as it started, the movement stops. The plane settles again, this time, in an even more dangerous position. This fall caused the water level inside to rise at an alarming rate. They soon realize they have no choice but to leave the wreckage before it completely floods, so they devise a plan. The biggest threat remains the sharks circling outside. Rosa recalls a lesson from school that sharks don't like bubbles. This gives them an idea, but there's another major problem: they won't be able to hold their breath long enough to escape. At that moment, Kyle recalls that he had seen some passengers boarding the plane with scuba gear. Danilo confirms this, telling them that the equipment is stored in the baggage hold and that it is accessible through the hatch. However, he warns that the air tanks would have been emptied before the flight for safety reasons. Ava remains hopeful, suggesting that the remaining equipment might still be of use. But Jed's persistent pessimism starts to take a toll on her. Overwhelmed, she excuses herself to the bathroom, where she finally breaks down. The plane continues to shake around her as she peeps at her mother's picture. After a few moments, she composes herself and returns to the group. Meanwhile, in the sky, the rescue helicopter is running dangerously low on fuel. With only 15 minutes remaining, the crew prepares to turn back when they suddenly spot floating debris. They immediately act fast as the divers plunge into the water and follow the wreckage trail. And their search eventually leads them to the plane. From the inside, the survivors see the divers approaching and they frantically wave at them, happy that they will soon be rescued. One diver immediately swims toward the wreckage while the other signals to them that help has arrived. Just then, the situation takes a tragic turn. A massive shadow emerges from the depths behind the diver. The survivors see it first and gesture wildly to warn him, but it's too late. In an instant, he vanishes beneath the surface. Moments later, his severed leg floats in the waters outside, shattering any sense of hope for them. Horror grips the survivors as they try to search for the second diver. Minutes pass with no sign of him, and above the waters, the helicopter crew receives no news from the divers. With their fuel critically low and no confirmation of any survivors, they have no choice but to abandon the search. Although they mark the coordinates, knowing that reinforcements are already en route. Back inside the submerged plane, the reality of their situation settles in. But Ava refuses to give up. If the second diver is gone, his oxygen tank might still be recoverable. So, she peered into the water where she spotted something, but she couldn't make out what it was. Then Jed volunteers to get a better look, climbing onto the seats for a higher vantage point. But he soon loses his balance and falls into the water. The group immediately scrambles to pull him out, and after some seconds, Jed suddenly resurfaces, laughing. He had pranked them with his fall. But his joke soon turns into a nightmare when he lingers too long in the waters. Suddenly, a shark strikes and drags him under. But the group reacts instantly as they grab his arms once more and pull with all their strength. In the end, they manage to pull him free and draw him back into the cabin. Unfortunately, the shark had already done some damage. One of Jed's legs was gone. He screams in agony and Marty immediately tries to stop the bleeding. Using seatbelts, she crafts a makeshift tourniquet, tightening it to prevent further blood loss. Jed continues to cry as he realizes that his dreams of competing in triathlons are over. Despite the unfortunate scenario, Ava knows there's no time to grieve. If they have any hope of escaping, they need that scuba equipment. So she calms herself down and prepares to take the risk. When Danilo opens the hatch, Ava dives in and lights up the darkness with a flare. She searches frantically until she finally spots the scuba equipment. Just as she reaches for it, an octopus startles her, and at that exact moment, her flare goes out and throws her into darkness. Above, the others grow anxious as the light disappears and they fear the worst. Moments later, Ava emerges, gasping for breath but with the equipment in hand. They hurriedly open the bags and find diving suits and masks, but to their dismay, there are only 4 sets. Before they can formulate a plan, a loud thud reverberates through the plane. They rush to see what had happened but they found nothing outside. When they turn back, Jed is already dead. Although Ava attempts chest compressions, Marty tells her that it wouldn't help. Suddenly, the plane shifts again, sliding downward. This time, the descent suddenly stops when the cockpit breaks off. Then, the water starts rising faster than before. Recalling Rosa's earlier comment about bubbles, they try to devise a plan as they intend to use the small oxygen canisters from the emergency masks to create bubbles and deter the sharks. However, the distance to the surface remains a challenge. Kyle, who was still reluctant, finally confesses a childhood accident that had left him traumatized and unable to swim well. With encouragement from Ava and Rosa, he tries to calm himself for the attempt. So, Ava gathers as many oxygen masks as possible, avoiding deeper water where the sharks lurk. Outside, the predators continue to ram the plane, and the ceiling starts to crack under the pressure, threatening to give way. In the nick of time, the group hurriedly changes into the diving suits. Marty, knowing she would only slow them down, volunteers to go without one. She has already made peace with her fate. With a final goodbye to Jed, the survivors dive into the water. As they swim out, the plane begins to slide once more. Then, the cockpit finally detaches and falls into the abyss. Without its anchor, the entire plane is doomed to follow. Marty urges Ava to go first, taking Rosa with her. The two swam through the narrow corridor, only to find their path blocked by a massive shark. Thinking fast, Ava releases an oxygen canister, creating a burst of bubbles that disorients the predator long enough for them to slip past. Danilo and Kyle follow shortly after, but Marty stays behind, watching as the water engulfs the plane. She knows she won't make it. As the rising water closes in, she silently prepares to reunite with her husband. Suddenly, in a panic, Kyle swims back, gasping for air in the last remaining pocket. Danilo moves to help him, but before he can react, a shark lunges at him and within seconds, Kyle is gone. Danilo quickly rushes to join Ava and Rosa, who have just retrieved the second diver's oxygen tank. Without hesitation, Ava sends them through the exit while she prepares to follow. But before she can escape, a massive shark blocks her path. She pulls back and remains completely still as the beast swims past, but as it does, its powerful tail knocks off her mask, cutting off her oxygen supply. Before she can react, more sharks start flooding the wreckage. With no way out, Ava makes a desperate dash toward the front of the plane. But the aircraft starts to sink and the water pressure pushes her back. However, she desperately clings to the seats as she struggles forward against the relentless current. Just as the plane disappears into the deep, she slips through a narrow opening at the last second. Now dangerously low on oxygen, Ava begins her ascent, but she soon becomes exhausted. Her vision starts to blur as she loses consciousness. Fortunately, her flotation device keeps her afloat, pulling her toward the surface. The moment she breaks through, the fresh air jolts her awake. She then starts calling out for Danilo and Rosa, but there was no response. Just when panic starts to take hold of her, a helicopter appears. The rescuers pull her to safety, where she finds that Danilo and Rosa are already on board. Her relief soon turns to heartbreak when Rosa asks about her grandmother. Unable to give the young child false hope, Ava tells her the truth. Silently, Rosa releases her beloved plushie into the ocean, as a sign of her final farewell to her grandparents. As they fly towards safety, the nightmare is finally over, but the scars of their horror will remain forever. And that is the story of the movie, No Way Up. If you enjoyed this recap, why don't you subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss out on our next recap? Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video.